Tonight, chaos on the House floor and a condemnation for the president. The fallout from a vote rebuking his tweets attacking 4 congresswomen. Plus, the State Department's fight for religious freedom. Faith Nation has the latest from a ministerial focusing on persecuted people of faith. And a look back at the life of Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. All that and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The partisan divide deepens in the halls of Congress. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The House vote condemning the president's remarks in a tweet is exposing a divide on Capitol Hill. The shift is accelerating the two sides of the aisle in Congress towards a partisan clash.
CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson is on the Hill with more on the spreading firestorm. Abigail?
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is moving forward in her defense of 4 progressive congresswomen, a day after the House vote condemning the president's attacks on the group known as the Squad.
We did what our members wanted to do.
Speaker Pelosi is presenting a united front, unequivocal in her defense of the 4 most progressive members of her party.
We weren't saying that he was racist. We were saying that the words that he used were racist.
The resolution passed Tuesday in the House.
The resolution is adopted.
Carries little firepower beyond an official condemnation.
I know racism when I see it.
The vote exposed a deep partisan rift.
I see nothing that references anybody's race.
With every Democrat and 4 Republicans voting to condemn the president.
They're choosing him over country.
The standard bearers of the group President Trump told to go back in Sunday's tweet spoke out after the floor vote.
They could not bring themselves to have the basic human decency to vote against the statement that the president made.
The House vote, a far cry from the normally staid Senate, where the issue is unlikely to come up in a chamber under Republican control.
The issue came up in the Senate, I wouldn't vote for it.
Do I think the president's a racist? No, and let me tell you why. If you're a Somali refugee and you were wearing a MAGA hat and you're a big Trump fan, you'd probably be having dinner at the White House.
After an impeachment resolution was introduced again in the House, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham was asked if it's all part of the president's strategy.
Once you vote to say the guys are racist, then it makes it harder for you not to impeach if you think they're grounds.
The impeachment resolution brought forward by a lone Texas Democrat is likely heading to a vote tonight. With Republicans in charge of the upper chamber in Congress, it's unlikely that vote will do much more than to unify Republicans. Back to you, John and Jenna.
All right, Abigail Robertson on Capitol Hill, thank you. Well, as the political drama continues in Washington, the president is heading to North Carolina tonight for a rally. His supporters might be happy, but will the rhetoric backfire on the campaign trail? CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy brings us that story.
Democratic candidates joined the chorus of lawmakers condemning the president's tweets, but it appears his comments did not rattle the base.
And he needs to go back to where he came from.
2020 presidential hopefuls speaking out against the commander-in-chief. Former Vice President Joe Biden tweeted that President Trump continues to spew hateful rhetoric, sow division, and stoke racial tensions for his own political gain. Senator Bernie Sanders added that Donald Trump is wrong. Despite the left criticism, support for President Trump actually increased. A Reuters Ipsos public opinion poll revealed his net approval among Republicans rose by 5% to 72% compared with a similar poll last week.
And it just proves that anytime the president is railing against Democrats, his base loves it.
CBN's Jennifer Wishon has covered the White House for nearly a decade. She predicts this move by the president should have minimal impact on his re-election bid.
Certainly the president's tweets are not going to help him win over new minority voters. But Ben, so many brawls and controversies are going to happen between now and 2020. I doubt that this is going to be much of a blip on the radar when it comes down to Election Day.
Tonight will be the first time the president addressed supporters after this weekend's Twitter attack. No doubt he'll weigh in, if not double down, on the controversy. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Ben. Well, Politico White House reporter Gabby Orr and CBN's chief political analyst David Brody are here now for more. Gabby, let's start with you. Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership did not want to go down this impeachment route, yet here we are today.
Yeah, it's something that Democratic leaders have feared for quite a while because it's very unpopular with most Americans. If you look at the polling that's been conducted just over the last 6 months, while there is a tendency for Democratic voters to support some type of rebuke of the president, whether that's impeachment proceedings or a censure on the House floor like we saw happen last night, there is not broad support for impeaching the president or going down that path among most voters. And I think that's why you've seen this hesitancy to avoid a situation like this. And this is going to be something that is difficult for Democrats to get out of. They really have three options here. They can punt this to the House Judiciary Committee, they can bring it to an up or down floor vote, or they can basically just not table this and not do anything with it. And none of those are that appealing at this point.
David, I guess this really focuses the question on who's driving the party here.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi is used to driving this minivan, if you will, or maybe it's larger than that. But no, they're co-drivers. There's a lot of drivers. The squad has a seat. Pelosi has a seat, and that's the problem. And I think finally, and I say finally because Nancy Pelosi has been really good at controlling the party, and this is the first time really in the history, or in her history as a Speaker of the House, that she hasn't really been able to corral the troop. And I think this is a simmering frustration that has obviously blown out into public, and I think it's just something we're going to see time and time again all the way through 2020.
Gabby, reportedly there are fewer than 100 Democrats who do support articles of impeachment. How risky is this politically for Democrats?
Well, it definitely carries some risk. As David was just saying, Democrats have always sort of presented this unified front, and this is really the first crack in that facade that we're seeing happen. Pelosi has prided herself on being able to have Democrats coalesce around certain things or to avoid these breaks in among party lines or within her own caucus, and yet now we're seeing that happen, and it's not just the impeachment proceedings that Representative Green has initiated. It's also the fact that we're now seeing this group of 4 progressive congresswomen sort of elevated to a place where they are the face of the Democratic Party. This plays right into the hands of the Trump campaign. It's exactly where they want the president to be. And I expect that at this rally this evening in North Carolina that we're going to hear him talk a lot about those 4 women.
David, speaking of party loyalty, ahead of the vote yesterday, President Trump told his troops to be loyal. And for the most part, they did. Only 4 GOP members went along with Justin Amash, who's now an independent, to vote against the president. What does this signal about party unity and loyalty going into 2020?
Well, nothing has changed with Trump. As a matter of fact, it's gotten even more unified under this president, which I know frustrates a lot of Democrats and his critics and all of that. But the truth of the matter is this party is a Trump party. It just is. And there's no getting around that. And I just, real quick, what Gabby said, which was a great point. Trump has now positioned the squad versus him in 2020. I mean, call it an inadvertent way to do this. I mean, it wasn't the best way to do it with that original tweet that was politically incorrect and insensitive, and some say racist. But the reality is that politically, this works perfect in 2020. Imagine Donald Trump saying, if you don't like America, you can leave America, versus the squad. And believe me, get ready for the sound bites to be queued up of Rashida Tlaib and AOC and all of those folks saying some pretty provocative things. That's going to be a real problem for them in 2020.
Yeah, and as we look ahead to 2020, some are saying that President Trump is really using this, Gabby, to set the stage for that. Your thoughts on that?
It's exactly what he's doing. His campaign sort of carefully packaged those unappealing tweets into a way that works into the broader narrative. He has been espousing a very patriotic message, a very pro-capitalism, pro-free market message over the past few months, and he's sort of pinning that up against the things that we've heard out of these progressive Democrats, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others who are very much aligned with her. And, you know, tonight, this is really going to be the first moment where we see Trump use those 4 women as his main foil. And this is exactly what he did in 2016 so successfully. There wasn't a key opponent or one person who was chosen for Trump to run against throughout the Republican primary in 2016. He just kept determining on his own who he was going to run against. He made Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush all into these sort of characters, and that's exactly what he's doing right now with these women.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Politico's Gabby Orr and David Brody, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
For religious freedom around the world, how the U.S. State Department is taking a stand and speaking up after this.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
As the nations rage, you can stand with Israel.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
Call 1-800-700-7000 and get to life.
This is our nature as a country.
Discover the untold story of how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religious he have, which color he is, this is what I'm doing.
Support Israel in their time of need. Get to Life, now available on DVD. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
And I wish that other people throughout the world could see this side of Israel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Welcome back. The State Department is putting the spotlight on the plight of those facing religious persecution, with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hosting a ministerial to advance religious freedom.
Today, those there heard from a religious activist in Pakistan who is speaking against a law there that he says robs people of their freedom. CBN News national security correspondent Eric Phillips joins us with more on today's meeting. Eric?
Well, John and Jenna, Sean Taseer says Pakistan's blasphemy law has to go. It's a fight he's been waging for years. And his father before him. In fact, his father, who was governor of Pakistan's largest province, was murdered all because of his outspoken stance against the law and his support for then-prisoner Asia Bibi. As many of our viewers already know, CBN News has been following her case for years. She is the Christian woman who was imprisoned in Pakistan because of blasphemy laws there. Bibi was eventually acquitted and fled just a few months ago, moving to Canada. But right now, more than 40 people are on death row or serving life sentences for blasphemy in Pakistan. In fact, the country has more people in jail for the alleged crime than all other countries combined. Taseer himself has faced death threats, but still he fights on.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll march on. And I have no doubt that the blasphemy laws of Pakistan, like the Jim Crow laws, like the apartheid laws of South Africa, like the Nuremberg laws of Nazi Germany, will take their rightful place in the dustbin of human history. And when that day comes, and I hope it will be in our lifetime, we may want to ask ourselves what we did to help those who suffer under this law.
Taseer says those who are victims of what he calls an unjust law are the elderly, the infirmed, underage children, the mentally ill, physically challenged, and those who are mostly illiterate and very poor. He says they're in jail without trial or due process of law, and he calls the front line in the war for religious freedom this very spot. Tomorrow at the ministerial, we'll hear an address from the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, about advancements in religious freedom over last year. We'll also hear from the Vice President. John and Jenna.
All right, great reporting, Eric Phillips. Thank you very much. Well, coming up, the Christian church on the move in the Middle East. How revival is happening in Iran.
Give me that. Bye. Sure, life is busy, but I found a way to make a huge difference in people's lives. I guess you could say I'm changing the world right here from home. I bring medical supplies and doctors to people in need, and dig wells so that villagers can have clean and safe water to drink. I make it possible to preach the gospel in over 100 countries, including right here in America. And when disaster strikes, I'm there, providing food, thank you, and emergency supplies to give people hope again. Every day, CBN and I are making the world a better place. Here you go. My life is hectic, so I joined CBN through Pledge Express. My bank does all the work, and I know that my gift is being used where it's needed most. So become a CBN partner and join Pledge Express, because you can do a world of good right from where you are. Hi, good morning. Are you ready to get started?
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Protect your sleep and live your best life with innovative information from 5 leading sleep experts.
If you're not a great sleeper, you can do things to make yourself a great sleeper. If you're already a pretty good sleeper, you can enhance your sleep and be even better.
Discover a sleep-enhancing bedtime routine, how to put insomnia to rest, learn how to relieve pain that disturbs sleep, and much more in Protect Your Sleep.
Everything you do better with a good night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Don't miss out on this brand new series.
The fastest growing church in the world just might be the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, we've hidden their identities for their safety, but CBN News talked to those witnessing firsthand the large number of Iranians turning to Christ.
Here's CBN News' Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell with a story.
The image Iran presents to the world is large demonstrations with shouts of death to America and death to Israel. Those who have seen Iran from the inside, however, paint a very different picture.
You can't believe the images on TV because, for example, all the protests that you see in the streets, those are mostly contrived. There are young students in the streets and they've told us, if we don't go to the streets, we won't get our grades, so we're forced to go and protest.
We've hidden the identity of this Iranian church worker. He says there are 2 Irans, the one you see on the news and the other hidden from the world.
Yes, I would say there's a 10% Iran and a 90% Iran. 10% control the country in a more oppressive manner, hardline, religious manner, and then the majority of the people, 90% of the people, love America. They don't hate Americans. I think that's the message that Americans need to hear. They tell us all the time, we don't hate Americans, we love America.
He wants Americans to know that 40 years after Iran's Islamic Revolution, there's another spiritual revolution underway.
Awaken to the truth that we live in a time that's very special. More people have come to faith in Iran in the last 40 years than the previous 1,400 years. So there's a once, not only in a lifetime, but in history, where we have a moment where Iranians are coming to faith at such a rapid rate.
Frontiers Alliance International is producing a documentary called Sheep Among Wolves to introduce the Iranian church to Christians worldwide.
What's taking place in Iran right now is spectacular. It's the fastest growing church in the world that owns no buildings, has no 501c3s, that owns no property, that has no bank accounts, that has no centralized leadership, that has no denominational leanings, and yet it's multiplying like crazy. What the Lord is doing there is staggering.
And that results in intense persecution that Thomas says leads Iranian believers to seek prayer. but not in a way you may think.
Typically the way we pray is, we expect that they want us to pray for the persecution to end. And they say, no, don't do that. Persecution is growing the church. When the persecution stops, the growth stops. What we want is for the gospel to spread far and wide and deep in Iran.
With Iran and the U.S. on the brink of war, Thomas says it's important to see what's happening behind the Iranian veil.
When Muslims from Iran come in contact with the man from Nazareth, something beautiful happens. And when they realize that they've been bought and saved and purchased with Jewish blood, prophesied by Jewish prophets in the Jewish Bible, something crazy happens, something beautiful happens, and that's what we're seeing take place in Iran.
Thomas believes one day the world may wake up to find Iran's church growth in the 21st century rivaling that of China and Korea in the last century. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
And here now for more is best-selling author Joel Rosenberg. Joel, great to have you. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you. Great to be back with you guys.
On the topic of Iran, we've seen growing tension between Iran and the United States.
Sure.
And if Iran continues down this path of enriching uranium, ignoring sanctions, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I've written a few novels about it because we don't really know. And so you have to sort of project out a few different scenarios. It certainly looks right now like Iran is trying to bait us into military action, which you'd ask, why would they do that? Because they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big. The reason is because they would think that they are going to take, that the United States would take limited action, and that whatever damage we did would help galvanize Iranian public opinion back towards the regime. I don't know if they're right about that, but I actually have to give President Trump credit for not taking military action recently. The sanctions are working. And by not taking military action yet, we're justified in doing it. We may have to. But by not doing it, we're actually starting to pull Europeans and other leaders who have been, who think America is on a hair trigger to use military action at any moment, right? And for Trump, of all people, at least from their perspective, to show some restraint, that caught them off guard, and it helped strengthen the case that we need to intensify these sanctions rather than let up.
You're here and you spoke at the State Department's ministerial conference. One of the topics discussed was how one of the keys for international religious freedom isn't just the ability to choose your own faith, but to change your faith. Right. Earlier in the program, we just saw Chris Mitchell's report on Christianity in Iran. What's your impression about the growth of the church in the Middle East?
Well, the church is growing, but the church has been under severe attack over the last many years. And in fact, even just a few years ago, what did we see? We saw jihadists beheading Christians in Libya, burning down churches in Egypt, waging genocide, actual outright genocide against Christians in Iraq and in Syria, and vowing to annihilate Christianity in the birthplace of Christianity. So that was at its lowest and its worst. We're off of those lows. We're in a situation where the church is not only growing spiritually and numerically, but Arab Muslim governments are actually saying we need to work together with Christians to strengthen them, to support them. They're part of our countries, and we want to help them. Egypt has rebuilt every single church that was burned down at government expense. And as Chris Mitchell was there with me, and he reported, Egypt built the largest church in the Middle East, and the Muslim president gave it to the Christians on Christmas Eve. But I'm also, as you know, meeting with Saudi leaders at the highest level, UAE leader, Jordan. We're going to Bahrain this fall for the first time. They just invited us as a group of evangelicals. What's happening? Something positive is happening. Now, I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture. There are very serious difficulties for Christians and all religious minorities in the Arab Muslim world, but we're seeing signs of progress, and when we do, those should be called out and encouraged, even as we encourage these leaders to do more to help Christians.
Well, one of the last times you were here, we talked about the Israeli elections with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, and we're back.
And we're back again, just a couple months later.
The gift I'm giving, right.
What's the situation now that he's up for re-election in a couple of months? Where do things stand now?
Well, as we tape this, I mean, my goodness, you would hardly know there's an election going on in Israel. Nobody's campaigning. It's very low-key at the moment, in part because everybody has just already heard months worth of the campaign argument. So this will heat up as we get into September, and that's the end of September is when the election will be. But at the moment, the polls don't indicate much change. So it's not clear. It's not clear if another election is really going to change the outcome and whether Netanyahu can put together a coalition. What is changing is all the people that don't want Netanyahu to be prime minister have more time to figure out how to work together and unify. I'm not saying it's happening yet, but that's the dynamic that's at play.
Well, we have up until September to wait and see how that all plays out.
Yes. Unless we do it all again a few months after that, I hope not.
We'll see. Yeah, Joel Rosenberg, it's always so great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys. I appreciate it.
From serving in the Navy to sitting on the Supreme Court. A look back at the life of Justice John Paul Stevens when we come back.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Finally tonight, former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens has died at the age of 99.
Stevens served on the court for nearly 35 years. Born in Chicago and a Bronze Star World War II veteran, Stevens was appointed by Republican President Gerald Ford. Today I talked with Carrie Severino, the Judicial Crisis Network, who told me even though he became a strong liberal voice on the court, he deserves the country's respect.
One thing that we should all be very thankful to Justice Stevens for, he was the last member of the greatest generation on the court. He served in World War II with honor, with distinction. He was part of at Pearl Harbor, part of the group of people decoding Japanese messages that were coming through, received a Bronze Star. And that patriotism and commitment to his country really carried through a lot of his time on the court.
President Trump ordered all flags at half-staff to honor the life and service of Justice Stevens. And he was one of the longest-serving Supreme Court justices in history.
Yeah, incredible legacy.
That's right. Well, that's it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.